Hi, I'm Brielle. On my birthday, my father looked me dead in the eye and demanded my $750,000 inheritance. Not because he needed it, but because his favorite daughter, the one draped in diamonds, had racked up a mountain of debt. And when I said no, they didn't argue. They called a lawyer and tried to prove I was mentally unfit to make my own decisions. But here's the part they never expected. I let them talk. I listened. And when the moment was right, I handed them one envelope that burned every lie to the ground. What would you have done if your own family tried to erase you on your birthday? Before we dive in, what time is it where you're listening from? Drop a comment, because this isn't just my story. It might be someone else's too. It had been years since I'd pulled into that driveway. The dogwood in the front yard had started to bud, just barely, and the faint scent of thawed earth clung to the breeze. I parked on the right, out of habit. My father always hated when I blocked the mailbox. A bottle of dry red sat in the passenger seat, still wrapped in the brown paper bag from the local wine shop. Next to it, a loaf of sourdough I'd made the night before. It cracked a little when I picked it up, still fresh. I'd figured it would be a quiet lunch, maybe a strange attempt at reconciliation if I were feeling generous. I stepped onto the porch. The house hadn't changed. Shutters painted a little too often, a welcome mat that said, "Bless this mess," but hadn't seen a speck of dirt since 2019. I rang the bell even though I knew the door would be unlocked. Some habits die hard. My mother opened it. She didn't smile. "You're here," she said like I was late. I wasn't. I offered the wine and bread. She took them without a word and disappeared into the kitchen. As I stepped inside, I heard it. Silence, but not the comforting kind. The air felt pressed down, like a storm was sitting right above the roof. I glanced toward the dining room and froze. It wasn't a lunch. It was a meeting. Every chair was filled, my father at the head, in a suit I hadn't seen since Aunt Clara's funeral. Arlette sat closest to him, decked out like she'd come from a boutique opening. Her blouse shimmered, gold earrings. Her nails looked like they'd been painted by someone who charged by the hour. She smiled, too wide, too fake. "Happy birthday, big sis," she said, almost like a taunt. I glanced around. Cousin Greg, Aunt May, even Uncle Dennis, who hadn't spoken to me since the incident with the will. Nobody looked happy to be there. Nobody said a word. I sat down slowly. The seat wasn't at the head. It wasn't even at the side. They'd left the foot of the table for me, farthest from the conversation. A glass of water sat waiting. No wine, no cake, no candles, just water. And eyes. "Everything all right?" I asked quietly. My mother adjusted the napkin on her lap but said nothing. For a moment, I let my gaze blur, and somewhere behind the curtain of awkward silence, I saw it again. My 10th birthday. Arlette's pony, trotting in the yard with pink ribbons in its mane, and me, handing out cupcakes to guests while holding a plastic hairbrush in my pocket. That was the year I knew. I didn't fit. Not really. Back in the present, the smell of roasted chicken filled the room, but no one was eating. My father cleared his throat. Formal. Calculated. "Well," he said, folding his hands, "since you're here, we wanted to talk about the inheritance, the $750. Not your inheritance, not even the estate. Just the $750, like it was a department store item on clearance." He went on, smooth and confident. "Your sister's in a bit of a financial jam. We know you'd want to help. After all, family takes care of family." Arlette didn't speak at first. Then, as if on cue, she dabbed her eyes with a white napkin monogrammed with an A. "It's been hard," she said softly, looking down. "Really hard." I didn't move. Not an inch. Inside, something old and quiet stirred. I remembered the late nights by Grandpa's bed, the nights I had to clean him, feed him, the sound of his oxygen machine, the way he whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me." And when he died, he left the account in my name, not out of favoritism, out of truth, out of recognition. They weren't there. Not once. Not for the cancer. Not for the grief. Now they wanted the money. My fingers curled slightly against my thigh, not from anger, from restraint. Dad reached into a manila envelope beside his chair and slid it across the table. "We just need your signature. We'll take care of everything else." I looked down at the paper. Simple legalese. A release. A transfer. It was my birthday. Mid-March. They hadn't said it. No card. No candle. No happy birthday. Just a table full of silence and a demand masked as a favor. I exhaled slowly. My voice came out steady. You called this a birthday lunch. No one responded. I looked at the envelope again. You brought me here to take what's mine. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just gave a small nod, like I'd said something forgettable, as if my words were nothing more than background noise on a day that apparently wasn't mine to begin with. My father adjusted his cuffs, the kind of slow, deliberate motion that always used to make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. Your sister's debt, he said smoothly, is bigger than we thought. It's not just credit cards. There are private loans, some business-related issues, and she's facing collections. It's serious. He paused as if expecting me to gasp. I didn't. Then came the worst word in the sentence. We think, well, we know you'd want to help. We're all in this together. We. That word again. My stomach tightened. That word had always been a trap. Growing up, we meant me covering for Arlette's lies. We meant I stayed home from senior prom to babysit her so my parents could attend a fundraiser. We meant I gave up my apartment deposit so she could buy her first designer purse for her image. She sat across from me now, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a napkin embroidered with a golden A. I tried. I really did, she said, in a voice so soft it barely carried across the table. But after the TikTok thing, everything fell apart. The brand, my name, it's ruined. She sniffled again. Her makeup, professionally done as always, hadn't budged. The storefront in Beverly Hills? Gone. The lawsuits are still pending, and people can be vicious online. She glanced toward the older relatives seated in a stiff semicircle around the table, as if hoping they'd affirm her suffering. Some of them nodded. Then our mother spoke up, smoothing her blouse like she was tidying the air around her. She just needs a reset, a fresh start. This family can't afford to have her fall apart. Arlette is the future of this family. I didn't laugh, though something in me wanted to. A sharp, bitter laugh that could have cut the air in half. Instead, I sat still. I thought of that day when Arlette was 16 and our parents surprised her with a brand new BMW, parked on the lawn with a ribbon. I was 19, just accepted to a small in-state college. I got a used Dodge Neon with a broken AC and bald tires. My father had smiled that day too and told me, "You're the steady one. That's why you'll do well supporting others." I didn't argue then. I didn't even ask why. But today the air was different. "You're not saying anything," Arlette said gently, almost like an accusation. "You always used to say family meant everything to you." A cousin across the table raised his glass. "Blood is blood, right?" Another, younger, leaned over and muttered, "Come on, she's the brand. You're the foundation." I caught that. The backup, he meant. I looked over to the sideboard, where a lone birthday card leaned against a vase. It was unopened, untouched. I stood to check, half hoping it might be signed. It wasn't. Just a pre-printed message. To someone special. No name, no handwriting, no effort. I sat back down. There was no wine at my place setting. Just water, flat, room temperature, a coaster with a smudge where someone had clearly moved a cup earlier. And still, they stared at me, waiting for me to bend. Like always. But something had shifted. Instead of rage, I felt clarity, a clean, cold stillness, like standing outside in winter after a fresh snow, everything so quiet it's almost loud. "I took care of Grandpa," I said slowly, hands resting still on the table. "I was the one who helped him bathe when he couldn't walk. I was the one who fed him, cleaned him. I stayed with him until the end." Arlette's eyes widened, like that detail had been too inconvenient to remember. "He left the money to me," I continued, "because I was there, because I showed up. You all had excuses. I didn't." My father leaned forward, face tight. "And now you're dishonoring his name by hoarding it?" "No," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I'm honoring the part of him that saw through all of this." That word again. This. The lies wrapped in lace, the performance of a family gathering masking a financial ambush. He slammed his palm on the table then, loud and sudden. The silverware rattled. "If you won't help us willingly," he said, his voice hardening, "we'll find another way." I didn't flinch this time either. I met his gaze, steady and unblinking. "Did you just say, us?" The words hadn't even finished leaving his mouth when the puzzle clicked into place. "We'll find another way." This wasn't heat of the moment. This wasn't about emotion. It was a play. I glanced back at the folded envelope on the credenza near the door, still untouched, still unsuspicious to anyone else, but now it looked different. Not a birthday card, a tool, a decoy. And then I noticed the room again, the seating, the expressions, the half-sipped drinks, the barely touched snacks, the relatives who didn't usually come, suddenly here, Uncle Raymond, who never left Delaware unless someone was dying, Aunt Marie, pretending to scroll on her phone but glancing at me every few seconds, like she was waiting for a cue. This wasn't a gathering, it was a stage, and I was the target. My father sat back in his chair, calm, unreadable. Arlette, right on cue, sniffled beside him. "I didn't mean for it to fall apart," she said, voice thin, like breath trying to masquerade as heartbreak. "I tried. God knows I tried." Her hand trembled slightly as she dabbed her eyes with a napkin. No actual tears. "I put everything I had into that brand. Beverly Hills wasn't ready for me, that's all," she said, casting a quick look around the room for sympathy. "The TikTok drama wasn't my fault, and the supplier lawsuit? That was sabotage." My mother leaned forward from the couch. "She just needs a clean slate, sweetheart. She's still young. She's the future of this family." Those words. Again. The future. I felt it in my teeth, a dull grind, my molars clenched without me realizing. The same words they'd used when Arlette got her brand new BMW on her 16th birthday while I was still driving the rusted-out Dodge with no air conditioning. "You're practical," my dad had said back then. "She's the one with presence. You're steady. That's why she needs you." I had nodded. At 16. Just like I had nodded at 18 when I got into college on a full scholarship, and Mom whispered, "We're so proud. But let's not tell Arlette yet, okay? She didn't get in anywhere, and she's fragile." And I had swallowed my excitement, because it was easier, safer. Even then, I knew, if Arlette cried, the world stopped spinning. When I was 24, just finishing grad school, my dad suggested I talk to someone. He said it gently, almost fatherly. "You don't react much, honey. You hold everything in. It's starting to worry your mother." What he meant was, "You're not performing the way we need you to." I did go to therapy, on campus, Dr. Weinstein. She'd asked good questions, sat with the silence. By the third session, she said plainly, "You're not emotionally detached. You're emotionally starved." I remember blinking at her like I'd been hit, like someone finally saw the empty plate I'd been pretending was full for 20 years. And I stayed in therapy after that, quietly, privately. It was one of the only things I kept for myself, except for Grandpa. He knew. One night, just a few months before he passed, I had sat by his bedside after helping him change out his bedding. He couldn't speak much, but he said enough. "You see too much," he rasped. "That's why they don't like it when you speak." I had laughed it off, adjusting his pillows. "I'm not hard to like, Grandpa." He touched my hand. "They call you difficult, but what they mean is you won't pretend." Then his voice dropped, his eyes serious despite the illness pulling at him. "If anything happens to me, don't let them take what's yours." And now, sitting in this room, surrounded by polite deception dressed up as concern, I realized they were trying. Again, this time not with guilt, not with pressure, with signatures. I turned back toward the table just as my father stood. "We've all been worried about your behavior lately," he said, tone light but with that unmistakable edge, "and we've been discussing options." Options. My gaze flicked to my mother, who avoided eye contact, then to Arlette, who was already nodding. "We thought," Dad continued, "that perhaps a conservatorship might ease things, just to help manage decisions for a while. Financial, mostly. You've had stress." It was laid out like a favor, a kindness, a knife with lace on the handle. I didn't move, I didn't flinch. Instead, I nodded once, as though considering it. Inside, my stomach coiled like a spring, but my face stayed composed. Not cold, not blank, just still. Let them play their hand. I'd let them stack the cards high enough to fall on themselves. My lawyer, Franklin, quiet, measured, brilliant, already had documentation on standby. I'd only need to make a call. I didn't come here alone, not really, not this time. They mistook silence for surrender. They always had. I glanced down at my watch, tracing the second hand as it ticked, then looked up. "I'm going to step out for a moment," I said softly, reaching for my purse. "Left something in the car." I didn't wait for permission. As I passed behind the couch, Arlette whispered just loud enough, "She's losing it again." I stepped outside and shut the door behind me, letting their muffled voices blend with the hum of cicadas and the soft crackle of dry grass underfoot. I didn't look back. Arlette's whisper, "She's losing it again," floated after me like a smoke trail. Let her think that. Let them all believe it for a few more minutes. My sandals crunched down the pebble path to the driveway. The sun was lower now, casting long gold shadows across the hood of my car. I opened the door slowly, slid into the driver's seat, and let my hand hover over the glove compartment for just a second. Then I opened it. There it was. A thick manila envelope, neatly labeled in my handwriting, taped shut, solid with weight and truth. I slid it into my lap and took a deep breath before opening the center console. Beneath the spare sunglasses and half-used hand lotion, I reached for the flash drive. Small, black, unassuming, but heavy with memory. I rested both items on my lap and stared out the windshield. This was never just about property, or inheritance, or even fairness. This was about erasure. I sat for a moment, letting myself go back to the day it all changed. Grandpa's living room had smelled like Vicks and old cedar. He was propped up on the couch, pale but alert, that dark green cardigan wrapped around him like armor. The lawyer had brought a tripod. Grandpa had insisted. "I want it on record," he'd said, "in case anyone decides to rewrite the truth after I'm gone." The camera's red light blinked on. "I leave this to my granddaughter because she stayed," Grandpa had said, eyes steady. "Not because she's blood, but because she's loyalty." My breath caught even then. I hadn't expected that, not in those words. I remembered glancing at the lawyer, then at Grandpa's nurse who stood nearby, nodding. I'd felt honored and terrified because I knew what this would spark. I could already hear my mother's trembling disappointment. Arlette's drama. The rumors they'd spread. But today I didn't feel afraid. I felt done. I opened the car door, stepped out, and walked back up the path, each step quieter than the last, each breath tighter in my chest. Inside, the house had gone still. My return silenced the whispers. Arlette leaned against the doorway, arms crossed like a queen expecting a show. "You okay?" She smirked. "Did you cry it out?" I didn't answer. Just walked to the table and placed the envelope down in front of me. My father's eyes followed it with caution. My mother looked from me to Arlette, unsure whose lead to follow. Without a word, I peeled back the flap and pulled out the first sheet. "I'll just read this once," I said, voice calm. "And then I'll let the document speak." I unfolded the first page and read aloud, word by word. As of March 8, 2022, I, David M. Alcott, being of sound mind and full mental capacity. Chairs shifted. My father leaned back. Arlette blinked. The words kept coming. Clean, legal, firm. "Hereby name my granddaughter Brielle J. Alcott as sole inheritor of my residential estate, accounts and associated holdings." I finished reading and looked up. "There are copies for each of you." I handed them out. One by one. No dramatics. Just truth. Arlette didn't even pretend to read hers. "This is manipulation," she snapped. "You tricked him. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing." "You said the will was still undecided," murmured Aunt Colleen. "You told us not to worry." My mother leaned forward slightly, trying for soft. "Sweetheart, we didn't know. We thought you'd want to keep the family together. We thought—" "Don't," I said flatly. Not now. I laid the final sheet down on the table, bolded, notarized, dated. It was the preemptive clause, the protection Grandpa insisted on. If anyone attempts to challenge this will without proper cause, it will be considered a breach of fiduciary trust, I read, and subject to damages under civil liability. Then I looked up and added, and if anyone here makes another comment about conservatorship, I've got a lawyer on standby, ready to file a defamation counterclaim, with video footage and character affidavits. The silence that followed was delicious. My father's face had turned a deep shade of red. Arlette looked like she'd been slapped. Even my mother, usually so composed, had no words. Her mouth opened, then closed. I picked up my water glass, still cold. I took a long, slow sip, then set it down with care. Now, I said evenly, should we cut a cake? Or are we done pretending this is a celebration? The silence hung like humidity after rain, thick, unwelcome, and lingering. No one moved, no one breathed too loud. Arlette stared at the envelope as if it might sprout fangs and lunge at her. Her eyes shifted, shock first, then humiliation, then the one I knew would come next, rage. You ambushed us, she hissed. Her voice was sharp, clipped, her knuckles were white around the edge of her wineglass. I leaned slightly forward and said quietly, No, Arlette, I protected what was already mine. Big difference. With a calmness I had learned to wear like armor, I reached into my purse and placed my phone face down on the table. The red glow from the recording icon still reflected faintly on the glass. Silent, indisputable proof. I didn't bother pointing it out. I wanted them to see it and squirm. Across the room I saw a few cousins shift uncomfortably. One looked down at her shoes, the other cleared his throat but didn't speak. Then an uncle finally muttered, You knew she had it, didn't you? He was looking at my father. Dad didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched, then unclenched. That money was never meant to divide us, he said flatly, as though issuing a sermon. I turned to him, my voice low but unshaking. But you were fine dividing me. For years. His eyes flickered, but he said nothing. That was when Arlette pushed her chair back with a loud scrape and stormed out of the room, heels hitting hardwood like gunshots. I followed. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. This wasn't a chase. This was a reckoning. She was in the small side room we used to call the reading room. It had barely enough space for a love seat, 2 dusty chairs, and an old lamp that flickered when you turned it on too fast. She stood by the curtained window, back turned, arms crossed tight across her chest. You followed me in here just to gloat? She snapped without looking back. No, I said, closing the door softly behind me. I came to give you space to tell the truth. Arlette let out a breathy laugh, then turned. Her mascara had begun to smear at the edges. There were tears in her eyes. But they weren't grief. They were fury. You always had to make everything about you, didn't you? She said. Even Grandpa's will. I folded my arms. He made that decision on his own. Oh, please, she spat. You think he loved you more just because you wiped his mouth? You were just there. I held her gaze. And you weren't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Only the muffled sounds of the party, or what was left of it, echoed faintly through the wall. I saw the crack in her mask before I heard her voice change. Her shoulders sagged, her lip trembled. And then, her words shifted. You called me that week, didn't you? When he fell? Yes, I said. 4 times. She looked down. Her voice dropped. I was in Mexico, shooting that brand deal. I remember, I said. You told me, hospitals aren't my thing. He cried alone that night. Arlette sank into the old chair by the window and stared at the carpet. Her voice barely carried now. I knew about the will, she whispered. I found out maybe 4 months ago. I didn't move. I let her keep going. Dad said it didn't matter, that if we all kept pressure on you, you'd hand it over anyway. Her jaw clenched again. He said you always cave, that you'd get overwhelmed, that you didn't have the stomach for all this. And you believed him? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. We bet on you folding, she admitted. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because she said it with so much certainty, as if folding was all I'd ever done in their eyes. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the weight of the silence do the talking. Then I stepped forward just slightly and asked, "Tell me, Arlette, what happens when the one who always folds finally doesn't?" She didn't reply. She couldn't. I turned and opened the door. Back in the main room, the energy had shifted. The small crowd had thinned. A few guests were already shrugging into their coats, murmuring polite goodbyes, avoiding my eyes as they passed. My mother stood by the dessert table, holding something in a folded paper towel. She walked toward me, careful not to look too long in my direction. "I saved you a piece," she said, holding out the slice of cake. The pink frosting was starting to melt against the paper. I looked at it, then at her. "I lost my appetite years ago," I said gently, and walked past her. I rinsed the paper towel of frosting under the faucet and tossed it in the trash. Something about the way my mother said, "I saved you a piece," had clung to me like smoke, familiar, choking, impossible to ignore. It was never about sweetness. It was always about claiming she'd done the bare minimum. That night I slept with my phone on the nightstand, screen down like the recording I'd left running. I didn't even dream, just floated in that hollow space between exhaustion and bracing for the next hit. At 6:07 a.m., my phone buzzed. I blinked into the early light and saw a voicemail notification. Unknown number. I tapped to listen. "Miss Marin, this is Attorney Jackson Grant, representing interests of the Rhodes extended family. There have been concerns raised over the emotional strain you may be under given recent events. The family is requesting an independent capacity review for the estate transfer, a neutral evaluation, of course." I stared at the ceiling while the message droned on. My thumb hovered over replay, but I didn't need to hear it again. They moved faster than I thought, not out of concern, not out of love, but out of fear that their lies were dissolving too quickly, too publicly. And now they were trying to paint me as unstable. I sat up, tossed the covers aside, and walked to the kitchen. Coffee could wait. This needed clarity. I pulled a storage box from the cabinet under the island. Inside, 3 folders, color-coded, labeled with dates and initials. I spread them across the kitchen table like a general preparing a counterstrike. Medical appointments, photos from hospice visits, time-stamped videos of Grandpa smiling at me while I fed him soup, cards he'd written in his own shaky hand. I even had the logbook from the nurse's aide who documented which family members showed up and who never came. At the top, I placed a sealed envelope marked Eval MM, confidential. I smiled, then I dialed. When Andrea, my attorney, picked up, she didn't say hello. Just a dry, "You knew this was coming." I replied, "It came faster than expected. That's all." She let out a low chuckle. "You ready?" "It's time." I got dressed with more care than usual. Slacks, clean blouse, hair up, not performative, just composed. I wasn't walking into war looking rattled. As I locked the door and stepped out into the mid-morning sun, I thought about Grandpa's voice, crisp even in his final months, saying, "They'll claim you took what they couldn't bother to earn." It had been just over a year since he first warned me. That night, I started documenting everything. I'd hired a third-party psychiatrist, one who had no idea about the inheritance, to run a full evaluation on me, cognitive, emotional, psychological. I told her it was for work. She said she wished more women did that. You'd be amazed how often men skip therapy but still run companies. The report was signed, sealed, notarized, months before Grandpa passed. At the law office, Andrea greeted me with a firm nod and a file box. We walked into a sleek conference room, cool air, cold water, and a receptionist who didn't meet my eyes. On the table sat 2 packets. She tapped the first one. Defense, the will, video testimony, medical records, witness affidavits, and, she held up a folder, your capacity eval. Then she tapped the second. Offense. We've already drafted an injunction. If they proceed with this stunt, we'll file immediately for malicious interference and emotional distress. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. She leaned forward, softened her voice. You did what most people don't. You prepared for the lie before they said it out loud. I nodded. Around noon, I left the firm. I stopped at a diner, grabbed lunch to go, and headed home. I was halfway through a bite of my turkey sandwich when my phone buzzed again. A message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, just a screenshot. It was a tweet from an account that looked vaguely like Arlette's, if not hers, then someone close to her. The profile picture was a blurry glam shot, and the name just said, Family Truths. The post read, "It's funny how the quiet ones play the long game. Manipulation wears many faces." The replies were worse. She trapped him. She isolated him. Elder abuse dressed as caregiving. I didn't blink. Instead, I walked over to the console table by the hallway and picked up the silver picture frame Grandpa had given me. It was us, on the porch, the day he signed the will. He was in his wheelchair, holding a lemonade. I was sitting beside him, his hand on mine. I took a photo of that photo, clear, timestamp visible in the corner. Then I posted it, caption, "Loved, witnessed, protected." Within 20 minutes, the comments shifted. A nurse replied, "I worked with dementia patients for 11 years. That smile? That's peace? That's trust." A verified account reposted it with, "This doesn't look like manipulation. This looks like devotion." Another, "Where were the rest of them when he needed help? This girl showed up." And then my inbox began filling. Quiet apologies, messages from relatives who had stayed out of the drama, now suddenly remembering how they saw me every holiday by Grandpa's side. No one wanted to be caught siding with the wrong team anymore. By dusk, Andrea called me back. "Certified letter went out," she said. "Your father should get it by morning." I pictured him standing in his kitchen, holding that envelope. Inside, a cease and desist, a legal threat to anyone who continued suggesting I was unstable or coerced my grandfather. Andrea read the final line aloud. "Further defamatory action will result in full legal retaliation, including pursuit of damages and public correction." I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just stood there watching the sun dip behind the neighbor's oak tree, my phone resting silently beside me. Then I whispered, mostly to myself, "You wanted a war, but I learned to win before I even spoke." Didn't pop a bottle, didn't text anyone, didn't even tell the neighbor who'd been kindly offering to help mow the front yard since Grandpa passed. I simply folded the injunction paperwork, slipped it into a manila folder, and tucked it into the drawer next to the tea towels. Then I made myself a cup of chamomile, sat by the kitchen window, and watched the wind wrestle with the oak trees. No music, no phone, just quiet. They wanted a war. But I knew something deeper than noise. Silence is what people like them fear most. The kind of silence that doesn't beg to be understood, the kind that doesn't explain itself. That morning, I let their messages pile up untouched. By noon, my phone had over 10 missed calls, one from my father. His contact name still sat unchanged. Bill, not Dad. 2 from Arlette, one from a cousin I hadn't heard from in 7 years. The rest were numbers I didn't recognize. By late afternoon, the texts started getting longer. My mother sent a wall of words beginning with, "We're still family, sweetheart," and ending with, "Let's not air our dirty laundry in public." In between, she mentioned peace 4 times and forgiveness 5. Not once did she say the word sorry. I didn't respond. That night, Arlette posted an Instagram story, eyes red, a trembling voice saying, "I never wanted to fight. I just wanted fairness. That's all." The background music was some overplayed acoustic cover of "Fix You," but comments started pouring in before the video even ended. Funny how fairness only mattered when money was involved. "Weren't you the one who posted that meme about old people and their smell? Where was your love when your grandpa needed help getting to the bathroom?" Someone had pulled up an old photo from 3 years ago, Arlette at brunch, champagne in hand, captioned, "When the old man finally sleeps in, time for mimosas." The internet didn't forget, and I didn't need to say a thing. 2 mornings later, I stopped by the corner grocery store to grab milk and eggs. I'd barely reached for the cooler door when a voice behind me said, "We saw the news." I turned to find Mr. Keene, the pharmacist who'd known Grandpa since his VA days. He looked me over for a second, eyes a little damp. "I just wanted to say," he continued quietly, "your grandpa, he was so proud of you. Always talked about you. How you handled things. We all knew." I nodded, not trusting my voice. On my way out, I passed a bulletin board near the entrance. Pinned to it was a flyer from the local Methodist church, Grandpa's old place. There, in clean serif font, was a line that made my breath hitch. "Annual Memorial, honoring those who served. Guest speaker, TBA." That afternoon, they called. A soft-spoken woman named Ruth asked if I'd be willing to speak a few words about Grandpa. Said it had been a long time since anyone in the family showed up for service, but everyone remembered his laugh, his faithfulness, his deep baritone during hymns. I said yes, but not because I owed them. I said yes because I wanted his name to be remembered right. Later that week, I sat at my kitchen table again, this time with a pen, not legal papers, and I wrote. Not a statement, not a clapback, just a piece I titled, "A Granddaughter's Goodbye, Loving Through the Unseen Hours." I didn't name names, didn't accuse. I wrote about watching birds with Grandpa on the back porch, about how he taught me to fold flags properly, and how he once cried when we watched an old war movie together, thinking I wasn't looking. I ended it with one simple line. "I don't need them to remember me. I just hope they remember how he smiled when we watched birds from the porch." The newspaper printed it the next Sunday. By Monday, people started stopping me at the gas station, the bank, even the post office. They said they cried reading it, that it reminded them of their own parents or grandparents or someone they'd quietly loved through difficult seasons. The piece made its way online, and within days, a local veterans group shared it on their page. A man who served in Grandpa's unit sent me a handwritten letter. Said, "He talked about you back then. Said you were his reason to keep going." I sat on the couch with that letter in my lap, rereading it 3 times. I didn't cry, I just sat there, hands folded, letting my chest rise and fall like I'd just come out of a storm I didn't realize I'd been walking through for years. Back at home, the silence continued, but it wasn't empty. It was full of weight, of clarity, of things left unsaid finally being heard without noise. Arlette took her posts down. Her teary video vanished from her profile. No more cryptic captions, no more fake virtue signals. My father? The voicemails stopped altogether. So did the long-winded texts from Mom. It wasn't victory, not the kind they'd recognize anyway. It was deeper than that. It was the peace that comes when the truth doesn't have to shout. One late afternoon, as light slanted through the kitchen blinds and dust hung still in the air, I heard the familiar thunk of mail drop into the box by the front door. I finished rinsing my mug, wiped my hands, and walked down the short hall. There it was, a plain white envelope, the seal crisp and unbroken. Return address, County Probate Court. Inside, a single sheet. It read plainly, "Final recognition of legal authority, full control of the estate assets granted to..." I read it once, then again. No elation. Just a quiet affirmation. I folded it carefully, carried it back to the kitchen, opened the same drawer near the tea towels, and placed it beside the first letter. Then I closed the drawer and breathed. The paper slid shut in the drawer with a soft click, but it echoed louder than any door they'd ever slammed in my face. I stood there for a moment, my fingers still resting on the edge, waiting for something, anything, to shift. But the house didn't answer. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Even the wind outside had stilled. I walked through the hallway slowly, the soles of my feet brushing across the hardwood, smooth from years of footsteps that weren't mine alone. Now every corner of this house had my name on it, legal, final. But if I was honest, the silence had its own weight. They used to talk over me. Now, there was no one left to talk at all. I moved through the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't reach for sugar or cream. I needed it sharp, something to cut through the fog that had settled in since the letter arrived. I took the cup and drifted through the back door like a shadow. The porch creaked beneath my step. That swing had sat empty since the morning of the funeral. I couldn't bring myself to sit in it, not without expecting him to be there too. But something in me had shifted overnight. Maybe it was the quiet that finally pushed me toward the memory. I eased into the swing and let it rock gently, barely enough to move the air. I sipped the bitter coffee and stared at the tree line, where birds darted between the pines like they always had. I used to sit out here with Grandpa, both of us in our own worlds, watching them take off and return again and again, always coming back, always knowing where home was. He told me once, his voice rough from age and war, "If you don't speak, they'll speak for you and rewrite you. Sometimes silence is armor, but sometimes it's surrender." I set the coffee down. Weeks had passed since the court papers were finalized, but instead of victory, what I felt most was a strange kind of grief, not just for him, but for the time I spent trying to earn something that never came. From them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out my old laptop and opened a blank document. By morning, I had the bones of a program. Something practical. Something that could actually protect people like me. People who loved in the background, who gave and stayed and were written out like footnotes. I booked a small room at the community center, asked for no budget, just a folding table, 3 chairs, and a whiteboard. 2 weeks later, every chair was full. I called it The Invisible Heirs, Estate Protection for Caregivers. I didn't lecture, I shared. The timelines I made while caring for Grandpa, the binder of letters, the living will template, the power of attorney kits. I watched heads nod. People scribbled things down. I printed extra copies. A woman in the back raised her hand. Her voice shook a little when she said, "They told me I didn't matter, that I was just the helpful niece, but after hearing this, I believe I do." I smiled, small but real. "You always did. They just needed you quiet to feel loud." Afterward, people lingered. A man in his 60s stayed to ask where he could take his sister to get her name added to the house they shared with their mother. A young caregiver clutched the workshop handouts like treasure, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone in what I knew. 2 days later, a cousin I hadn't heard from in over a year emailed me. She said she'd seen the article about the workshop, said she was so proud of me and wanted to rebuild the family name together. I stared at the screen a while, then typed back, "I wish you peace, but my peace doesn't live at that table anymore." Then I deleted the thread before she could reply. That Sunday, I finally returned to the raised garden beds Grandpa built behind the porch. Weeds had crept in during all the chaos, wrapping themselves around the rotting timbers. I pulled them free one by one, my gloves damp with dirt and sweat. As I tugged a stubborn root loose, something fell from between the slats of the garden box, a small notebook. I brushed the soil away, heart catching in my chest. Inside, folded neatly between the yellowed pages, was an envelope. My name was written on it in his handwriting. I sat back on my heels and opened it. It was short. A few sentences written with the same patience he used for everything. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone, but I need you to know, I always knew it would be you. You were the one who stayed, and you were never invisible to me." I read it twice, then again, and then I cried. Not like before, not tight-chested and silent, but loud, from the gut. The kind that empties something you didn't even know was full. I didn't try to stop it. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the garden beds were newly planted, I stepped back inside and found an envelope on my welcome mat. Official-looking, heavy cardstock, my full name printed at the center. The city council was honoring me at the upcoming civic event for service and integrity to the local community. There it was. No titles, no attachments, no daughter of, no related to, just me. I stepped inside just as the evening light slanted across the stone pillars of City Hall, painting everything gold. The doorman barely glanced at me. No one was waiting at the entrance. No family rushing to hug me. No Arlette pretending we'd made up. Just my heels on the polished floor and the sound of my own breath. I'd chosen the plain black dress, cotton, not satin. Clean lines, nothing flashy. It made no statement except that I had nothing left to prove. Before walking out the door, I'd pinned Grandpa's bird-shaped brooch to the collar, faded brass now, but still holding its shape. He gave it to me on my 21st, said it was for who you are when no one's watching. As I passed a wall of glossy portraits of past honorees, I felt something shift inside me. Not nerves, not regret, just a quiet kind of clarity. It used to hurt, being alone. But tonight, it felt like standing fully in my own name. I followed the usher down a narrow hallway. She smiled gently, told me I'd be up third on the program. I nodded, sat backstage on the bench, smoothed my skirt once. The folder in my lap felt light, almost unnecessary. The words were already inside me. Then I heard it. My name. They didn't call me daughter of, or caregiver to, or heir of. They called me community advocate. And when I stepped into the light of the stage, they stood. All of them. The pharmacist who once gave Grandpa extra vitamins when Medicare wouldn't cover it. My old next-door neighbor, Mrs. Green, her oxygen tank humming softly at her side. A teenager from the legal workshop who'd asked, shyly, if she could copy my document binder. Dozens of them, standing. They were clapping before I said a word, and it rattled me. Not because I didn't expect it, but because a part of me had stopped believing I'd ever be seen for something I chose, not something I survived. I stepped to the microphone, took a moment, looked out at their faces. None of them owed me anything. And yet, here they were. I'm not here as someone's daughter, I began, or as a symbol of loss. I'm here as someone who learned, the hard way, that silence doesn't protect you, it only buries you. I heard no coughs, no rustling, just breath held. I was a caregiver, not for glory, not for gratitude, but because that's what love looked like in our house. Until it didn't. My voice stayed steady. They told me I was last, an afterthought, unworthy. But sometimes, being last in their eyes is exactly what makes you first in truth. And then slowly, I let the last line land. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they share your blood. I stepped back. For a full second there was nothing. Then the room erupted, not wild, not chaotic, but with that kind of applause that comes from people who've been holding something in for too long. I didn't bow, just placed my hand over the brooch. That was enough. Afterward, I didn't linger for the photos or punch. I made it halfway to the door when a woman stopped me, maybe in her 70s, thin frame, sharp eyes. My son, she said softly. He's caring for me now. We've already done the paperwork, because of your story. I opened my mouth, closed it again. That moment hit harder than the crowd's roar. When I got home, the sky was already soft with dusk, the last pink and lavender hues curling over the treetops. I changed into my old jeans, pulled my hair up, and stepped out to the porch swing with a warm blanket around my shoulders. A few birds landed on the railing, calm, watching, the way Grandpa used to sit, silent, listening more than speaking. The wooden swing creaked as I leaned back. They tried to prove I was unfit to carry his name, tried to erase the years I spent doing what none of them wanted to. But all I had to do was live the way he raised me to. That evening I didn't write. I didn't check my phone. I just sat there, watched the sun disappear behind the trees like it always did. And I wondered, do you think I was too cold? For staying silent when they begged? Too proud? For refusing to share what was never theirs? Or maybe some of us were never meant to be forgiven for surviving our own families. And that's okay, because sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing what broke. It comes from building where no one thought anything could grow.